Okay, we are moving on to the next unit, which is the American Romantic unit. Sorry, just slid down a little on you there. When we say romantic, we are not talking about, kissy kind of romantic. We're talking about something else entirely. I just want to make that clear. They don't really have much of anything to do with each other, but we are going to talk about what we do mean. And I'm going to have some American Romantic movement art throughout the presentation to kind of give you a sense of the aesthetic, the style they were going for. We'll also talk about some of the rationale behind the changes in style as well. So the American Romantic movement, sliding around, trying to find a sweet spot here. The American Romantic movement, like much of American society, artistic, literary, and intellectual, originated in Europe toward the end of the 18th century, and that's where we left off last time with the Revolution, which does sort of overlap. So we're looking at late 1700s to about the middle of the 1800s for this particular period. It was reactionary, and some of the things that it was reacting against was the Industrial Revolution and subsequent urbanization. Like, lots of people were leaving the countryside and moving to urban areas for work, and the kind of work that they would be doing, and we still have quite a bit of it today, even with automation. But so you want to think about it like let's think about shoes for a second, okay, as an example. So pre-industrial revolution, and still in some very rare cases, there'd be one person responsible for making the entire shoe, okay, from start to finish. They would cut the pattern, they would tool the leather, they would do everything from start to finish. So that craftsperson would be able to see the end result of what they had created and been involved, as they say, from soup to nuts, right? Whereas with the Industrial Revolution, they figured out, hey, you can make nice stuff that way, but what goes a lot faster and is a lot cheaper? If instead of having one person spend all day making one pair of shoes, we have hundreds of people, and each person has one very specific job, just one. Like, their job is to nail the nails in to the shoe, back when they used to use nails and shoe nails. Their job is just to do the nails really, really fast. And they do it over and over and over and over again for hours and hours and hours and hours at a time, like endlessly. And that's what they do every single day, and it never changes. Well, if you've got lots of people each doing one very specialized little job, you can make hundreds of shoes rather than just one pair of shoes versus just one pair of shoes. And it's, in the long run, much cheaper, and it's much faster, and hence that's where we get this massive explosion of material goods for much cheaper than had ever been dreamed of. But it also resulted in, a lot of the kind of modern anxieties and issues that we have today about, quality of life as well. Like, what's more important, having lots of stuff or having time and having a sense of pride and purpose in the work that you do? Because of course that's going to be lost if all you're doing is the same sort of menial task over and over again every day. So a lot of people were, though, and the romantic kind of thinkers of the time felt that was really dehumanizing, and they were trying to get back to kind of more of like human spirit, human potential kind of thing, rather than looking at humans as being like machines. There was also a lot of changes happening socially and politically. As we know, the revolution had occurred, and so there was a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of anxiety because there were different schools of thought, as we know, about human potential and what unchecked freedom could lead to in humans. And so that's where we're going to get more of a sense of creating a national identity, but also a drive toward creating individual identity as well. And that's an anxiety that we still carry with us as Americans to this day, right? That trying to bridge that weird identity crisis between, identity as a nation, but also that we're a nation of individuals, but we all need to kind of toe the line and do certain things to be respectful of the nation. It's complicated. It's complicated. You're living it. But one of the big things at the time that was also causing some anxiety was the release of Marx's seminal work Das Kapital, which basically said, in a nutshell, that capitalism would inevitably decay. That system is designed toward decay rather than growth, and that the working class would triumph over the bourgeoisie. So, yeah, that was kind of a conflicted issue as well for the kind of social structure that Americans had developed. Okay. But they also wanted, to get rid of aristocrats and things like that too. So this sense of like the American-made man and everything. Lots of anxieties. Also anxiety about the scientific rationalization of nature and our place as humans within it. So the origin of the species, Darwin's seminal work, I'm sure you've heard of it. If not, you should go find out more about it because it's pretty important. This is where we get the theory of evolution and humanity being placed not necessarily on par with other animals, but it really forced humans to accept a truth about humans as being animals, and this idea that there is a scientific rationale behind everything that happens in nature. And so the Romantics were pretty exhausted by that. And also there's just a lot of confusion that came up with it too. So the Romantics just felt like there were limits to what could be explained scientifically and rationally. So if you're not confused yet, you will be. So some of the stylistic elements of the movement, and this is something that is going to come up for the discussion board on this unit. You're going to pick one of these things and you are going to talk about it using examples from the literature. Not the introductory stuff, y'all. Come on. The actual literature, okay? This is how you prove to me that you're actually reading and paying attention. Most of you are doing that, but some of you are still trying to cheat and use the introductory stuff, so knock it off, okay? You're going to pick one of these stylistic elements and find specific examples of it from the assigned literary text. So some of the stylistic elements that Romantic literature is known for is this intense love of nature, this idea that nature holds almost like a spiritual truth to it, that there is a beauty and a truth to nature that human beings have gotten away from and we need to get back to. And that's going to be especially important when we branch off into the transcendental movement. Again, that sense of nationalism, the sense of like almost kind of a superior American identity that we still, frankly, hold on to this very day. We also have a huge interest in the supernatural. I mean, look at how we celebrate Halloween, for crying out loud. Like, other countries don't do that the way that we do that. They really don't. And yeah, we'll be talking about the Gothic movement just in time for Halloween. But there was an intense interest in the supernatural. And a lot of that had to do with just kind of escapist, imaginative thinking, again, in reaction to all that kind of overwhelming stuff that we were just talking about. And also this sense of like that literature shouldn't be too highbrow, but instead should really appeal to the common person, the common reader. And literacy rates had absolutely ballooned during this time. So it was far more common for people to be reading. So there was a real drive, there was a real push toward creating literature that anyone could sink their teeth into, that appealed to everybody. It wasn't just like morally, we saw that from revolutionary literature, like everything had to be serving some kind of larger purpose. But this was more like, let's all enjoy and play around in our imaginations for a while and lose ourselves in a good book. One of the greatest feelings there is, right? So there's also this idea of like exoticism and this idea of what they call the charm of the unfamiliar, things that are new and exotic and unfamiliar and mysterious. A lot of that kind of stuff going on too in Romantic literature. Okay. So all of this was embodied in a lot of different forms, but most strongly in visual arts, like the kind that we're seeing on these slides here. Music really blossomed into its own kind of style during the Romantic period. And then, of course, for our purposes, literature. It was associated politically with a more kind of libertine, liberal, and radical almost lifestyle, like really pushing limits and boundaries and trying things that are new and different, more progressive and radical versus traditional and conservative. This again ended up having a significant long-term effect on the growth of a sense of nationalism in this country, because it created a sense of American culture for those who were born within the new nation. Okay, so this is really the first generation of people who were born in what we now know is America because of the Revolution and how that went down. So there's a generation of new Americans, and this was helping them get a sense of like, okay, who are we? How are we different from others? Again, taking from European culture, like Americans didn't come up with this, but we do what we always do, right? We took the best and we innovated it and we made it our own. So what was going on in the U.S. in particular, Washington Irving, his book Knickerbocker's History of New York is a quintessential early American romantic text, and that's why we're going to be reading two stories from this collection, and you've probably heard of them before. Romantic Gothic literature made an early appearance with Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, and we're going to read both of those. And you've probably heard of at least The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. If you've seen the film, the Tim Burton film, it's fine. He definitely had to. It's not a very long story, so he had to really use a lot of artistic license on that. It's great. It's a great movie. Don't get me wrong, but if you try to just watch that movie instead of reading that story, you're going to say all kinds of things on the discussion board that are frankly just not in the story at all. So don't do that. Not a good idea. And then Rip Van Winkle is another classic tale as well. You've probably heard of it. So we are going to read both of those. But this was one of the first commercially popular books in the United States. Like it sold hugely. It was really popular. And the reason people really liked it is because there was a real emphasis on this idea of the picturesque, charming local color kind of elements. It's a real study